Montgomery ran aground off Sheerness in 1944, carrying thousands of tons of bombs. Half are still aboard the sunken wreck. The government claims that it's too dangerous to remove them and says an explosion would devastate Sheerness and parts of Southend. But in this week's Friday Focus, Hugh Kirby meets an expert who says the wreck could and should be moved.
A Scandinavian cargo ship makes its way along a narrow channel past the wreck of the USS Richard Montgomery, a wreck that hides a deadly cargo. Beneath the waterline, the rotting hulk holds 3,173 tons of bombs, containing 1,400 tons of high explosive. Orange marker buoys ring the Montgomery. The shipping lane is just 300 feet to the south. This unique underwater menace is under constant surveillance by Medway Port Authority officers. The Richard Montgomery, 7,176 tons, 441 feet long, is an American-built Liberty ship. Her last mission was to supply US bombers on mainland Europe in the closing stages of the Second World War. She sailed from the Delaware River in early August 1944, arriving safely in the shelter of the Thames estuary to await onward convoy to Cherbourg. The Montgomery dropped anchor off Sheerness, but on Sunday, August the 20th, during an exceptionally high tide, she swung at anchor and went aground on a sandbank. Her metal plate started to groan and buckle. A week later, during severe gales, the Montgomery began to break in half. This is her original stowage plan. Using it, 30 stevedores from Rochester worked round the clock to unload her. They cleared holds 4 and 5 in the aft section. On September the 25th, 1944, she was abandoned, along with half her cargo. For more than half a century, the British government's official position has been that the 1,400 tons of high explosives left on board the Richard Montgomery are too dangerous to move. Too dangerous because down there in the hold are fragmentation bombs. Bombs that are fused, they are armed, they are ready to explode. But in 1972, after decades of government silence, Essex County Councillor David Cotgtove co-wrote the definitive study of the risks posed by the Montgomery's cargo. His conclusions contradict the official line.
I'm as sure as God made little apples that the remaining bombs that are left on the Richard Montgomery out there now are not fused.
Now, how do you know that?
For a number of reasons, really. I researched the American bomb records. I've also spoken to the stevedore who was in charge of the unloading of the vessel when she was out there breaking up during the war. And they were trying to get the bombs out before she disappeared from view under the water. Now, the stevedores knew what they were handling, and a fused bomb, they would know what that meant. And I asked Tom Adams, who was the master stevedore in charge, whether the bombs were fused, and he said, no, they weren't at all.
These are dummy cluster bombs. Some 2,000 are down on the wreck. Together with the rest of the cargo, they could explode if detonated, for example, by a terrorist. In 1969, students phoned in a threat to blow up the ship as a joke, a threat that sparked a full-scale alert. This is what a civil servant told Mr. Cotgtove in 1973. He refuses to name him for fear of legal action.
He said, you live in Southend. Southend wouldn't suffer very much damage if the ship went up. He said it would only be Sheerness that would suffer the casualties. And I was horrified that a civil servant of the Crown could say such a statement and think so slightly of people who live over there in Kent.
Those people who live over there in Kent have mixed feelings about the ammunition dump a mile and a half offshore.
You just don't think about it. You don't like to think about it, really.
If it went up, I understand the tidal wave would come over the island a bit, you know.
Is it going to blow up?
Well, I was wondering whether you were worried that it might do just that.
Well, I suppose we're all worried, aren't we?
If it goes up, we'll go with it.
Doesn't that bother you a bit?
Not really. Got used to it now.
It's regularly looked at by the Ministry of Defence.
Indeed it is, but how often? These pictures were taken in 1983. Divers carried out an external survey of the Richard Montgomery. But conditions underwater make detailed examination very difficult. The tide churns up mud, gravel and sand. Southend East MP Sir Teddy Taylor this month asked the Transport Secretary when the last inspection of the vessel Richard Montgomery was carried out. The reply? A very thorough survey was completed early in September. We hope to be in a position to make a statement shortly. The ship lies at 51 degrees 28 minutes north, 0 degrees 47.2 minutes east. Critics say the time has come to remove it. But the port that shares the waterway isn't in the least bothered.
We see ships of all sizes passing it daily. In fact, at the moment, there are something like 13,000 movements a year passing the Richard Montgomery wreck.
And it doesn't disrupt the shipping at all?
In no way whatsoever.
So you wouldn't want to see it move necessarily?
Oh, I think obviously in long-term interest it would be nice to see it removed, but I suppose it's become such a focal point in all our sort of thinking that we would miss it in some respects.
David Cotgtove claims the bow section with its 3 munition-filled holds is splitting in 2, and the government now has no excuse not to act.
I would say that in my lifetime the bombs will be removed from that wreck.
And what will you do when the last bomb is removed from the wreck of the Richard Montgomery?
One to me.
The latest government statement is expected within days. It might, just might, spell the beginning of the end of the story of the Richard Montgomery. Hugh Kirby, Coast to Coast.
With that, we'll take another break. In part 3, the Sussex man whose campaign has saved 1 million seals, and the Essex men who are gunning for a place in the big Rugby Cup.